So let's dive straight in, taming the inbox. So really, I think the fundamental question we need to be asking is, are we in control of our email, or is our email in control of us? And all too often the answer is the latter, and I don't think really I ever meet anyone that claims that they are happy with the volume of email they receive. And certainly it's a growing problem, and unless we start to take action now, it's not going to get any easier. So what can we do about it? Sorry, I shouldn't really introduce myself for those that haven't been on one of our webinars before. So I'm the MD of Lumina Technologies. We're a managed service business. We provide an outsourced IT department to small to medium businesses around London and the home counties. We do a number of these presentations, both webinars and face-to-face briefings that we do within our office. And really, the intent is to be able to provide a value add to give people sort of an update and a heads up as to how they should be more productive. And so if you have any ideas as to any other topics you'd like us to cover, please add them into the comments. So, as I said, we're losing the battle with email, and it's fundamentally quite a stressful activity. I know for myself, when I come back from holiday, the volume of emails that I potentially would face forces me to deal with emails while I'm on holiday. I don't want to be doing it, but I would almost rather have that small incremental pain of having to deal with it each morning and evening, rather than coming back and finding 2,000-3,000 emails that I now need to get responded to. So it adds to that stress level, and all the time we're seeing more and more email coming in. When you're trying to get on with other things, it's not helping us at all. There are a number of studies that have shown that checking of email is addictive, that it creates a sort of a dopamine hit, and we see people just constantly, when they're waiting for a bus or waiting for the lift, to get their phone out, quickly check for emails. And someone once sort of gave the comparison that it would be like sitting down to watch TV in your living room and every 5 minutes jumping up to open the front door to see if there was anyone there, irrespective of whether you'd heard a doorbell or not. And we get into this habit of just checking for emails all the time. It's hugely distracting and ultimately very unhealthy as well. And also, we're going to talk a little bit about this right to switch off. So the French government mandated this a couple of years back, and it came into effect that workers effectively had that right to switch off at the end of the day. They could turn their phone off, and you couldn't require them to stay on call and be able to respond to emails. But we abuse that in this country, and suddenly I'm no different to anyone else. And in a senior management position, we have to think about what message that's sending to our staff. If we're sending an email out to 9 o'clock, we may well choose to burn the midnight oil and stay in the office. Everyone else has gone home. But how do we want them to be reacting to that? Are we managing expectations within the organisation as to how emails should be responded and handled? Okay, so a few numbers. And really, for me, these are quite scary numbers. But 13 hours a week reading and responding to email, if you consider that as part of a 40-hour week, over 25% of our time, indeed 28% of our working time, is spent dealing with emails, 650 hours a year. And given how little of it is actually productive, and indeed 38% is the figure that we have there, that's a staggering figure. And I think that really should sort of cause us to take note of how email is a problem. And with 64 seconds to return focus to whatever task in hand we have, again, that highlights the case that it really is a huge distraction, a huge time waster. So really to flesh that out into the financial figures, no, so I haven't got the slide in front of me. So I'll skip that. I do have some notes, and I'll certainly circulate those afterwards as to how you can sort of equate that into a financial cost to the organisation. So I'm going to jump straight forward now into some of the tips we can use to manage our email. But before I do, let's look at a couple of extremes. And there is a real-world example. So the first screenshot that you're seeing, this was actually taken from my own inbox. And this reflects my style and what I'm going to be promoting today of how I manage emails, which is really to stay on top of it, to say I am going to finish each day having cleared down the emails from my inbox so that I start each day with effectively a clear inbox. I would love to say that I get it down to 0 every day, but the reality is I don't. And the main reason people don't get it down to 0, or indeed anywhere close to 0, is we all have a tendency to use our inbox as a to-do list. So there's a bunch of emails in there, and we leave them in there because we know that we're going to want to take some action on them at some point. It may not be in the next 24 hours, but we leave it in there because we don't want to lose sight of them. And that behavior really kind of encourages that exponential mailbox growth. And indeed, when we look at the next extreme, which is taken from one of our clients, and he's a solicitor, and 92,000 emails, but 45,000 unread emails. Now, straight away, that should really be saying there's a problem here. If 50% of your emails are going unread, you're clearly receiving far too many emails. But what is this individual doing to stay on top of his emails? Well, clearly in this case, absolutely nothing. And hopefully this presentation is going to give you some of those tools and tips as how you can actually do that. Now, there are two schools of thought. The staying on top of email is my methodology, is the one that I advocate and promote, and indeed what this session is about. Or there is the don't bother approach, which in the previous example we saw perhaps that is his approach. He said, well, I'm just not going to care. I'm not going to worry about it if there's these unread emails that I haven't responded to. But I think that sort of stress factor of, is this something important? Have I missed out something? Has somebody sort of effectively invited me to a meeting or required me to do something I haven't then done? So if we are going to stay on top of it, do we need to actually then have a digital detox so that we can spend time away from email and not have to worry about it at all? So over the weekend, do we still check emails, or should we be actually saying, once I get home, I turn the phone off, I'm not going to touch emails until the next day? That's clearly promoted as a more healthy alternative to how we approach our emails. But is emails the problem, or is it us that are the problem? Are we creating that culture of constantly looking at our emails? Why are we doing it? Certainly backside covering, I see many examples of people CCing other people purely so that they can't be accused of not having informed someone. So I think that proliferates that sort of ongoing CCing, and CCing itself comes under a lot of scrutiny. Another school of thought is that you should have an Outlook rule that just deletes anything that you're only the CC on. If someone hasn't felt it's important enough to actually send it directly to you, then you shouldn't bother even reading it. I can't really do that. I see the CCs, and when they come to me, I inevitably have to look at them, because there is that sort of draw, there's that addictive nature. There's an unread email, you've no idea what's in it, you are going to go and look at it. Micromanaging, are we actually requiring our staff to CC us on every communication? Certainly if we are doing that, I would suggest that probably hints at us overly micromanaging our staff. And indeed, are we hiding behind email rather than just picking up the phone and talking to people and having those conversations? Now, quite famously, Atos, many years back now, 7 years ago, the CEO made this grand proclamation that he was going to make it a zero email company within 3 years. And they certainly made good strides on that. And now, I don't have an up-to-date statistic because effectively they didn't report anything further, but by 2014, they had cut email by 60%. That's actually quite statistically significant. And if we think back to that earlier slide of how many hours a week we're spending on emails, and indeed how many hours a year, 650 hours a year, 60% of that gives us a lot of productive time back. Now, they had an operating margin increase over that same period. I'm not going to try and correlate it back to the email transfer, but it certainly meant that they weren't overly suffering as a business by having to move away from email. So how do they do it? What do we actually mean by zero email company? Well, clearly they didn't make it, and I think that would be impossible. We can't continue to communicate with the outside world without having email. But certainly internally, there's a lot more we can do to avoid just sending emails, perhaps picking up the phone, perhaps walking over to someone's desk, or having appropriate meetings to be able to manage emails instead. But is technology the answer? Can we solve it with technology? Or is it just a habit that we need to get into, and how we manage that? Now, Microsoft have a number of different solutions available to them. So they use Outlook as a traditional email client. We've all grown up with Outlook. We're very comfortable with it. Yammer is a sort of a newer kid on the block, although now been around for a couple of years, a sort of a social media platform, perhaps a better way of communicating with people rather than straight out email. And Teams is something we're now experimenting with within the organization, sort of instant messaging. It's a lot more immediate. It allows us to stay in touch, perhaps when we're out and about on the road. And certainly I think there's a lot of validity in how we can not use email, which is a very offline means of communication, rather than just having sort of that straight conversation. There are a number of third-party products as well that we can use. So one that we use to great effect is Doodle Polls, and they can also cut down a lot of that email traffic, both in my personal life and in my business life. When you're trying to set up a meeting between multiple people, and the more people, the worse it gets, very quickly you can just have this ongoing chain of emails back and forth of, are you free on this date? No, I can't do that date. What about that date? And everyone's chipping in. Whereas a doodle poll, you just publish all the potential dates for meeting up. Everyone ticks which ones they want to participate in or available for, and you come up with a common or sort of the most appropriate date to be able to do that. So that can cut back on emails quite significantly. Paper, writing to each other again. We don't do this often enough, but perhaps some of our external communications, we can sit down and actually write a letter rather than sending an email. Now, that's not always going to be applicable, but if we think of it from a customer service perspective and indeed trying to get messages across, a lot of people now are looking at some of the older methods of communication rather than just email. I think email has just taken over our lives, and we now need to claw it back a little bit. Picking up the phone, as I said, do we always need to be writing that email? Are we avoiding having a difficult conversation by hiding behind that email rather than having that face-to-face conversation, or indeed just picking up the phone? An irate customer, perhaps, rather than emailing them, give them a call. So it's a quick table just to highlight some of the differences in Microsoft's tool set and why they're positioning them in different ways. So Outlook being the traditional one, it has a higher degree of familiarity because we have all grown up using it. And when they talk about a high level of complexity, what they mean there is effectively we can create complex messages. So if we need to create sort of bulleted lists of things and talk about a subject in detail, Outlook is always going to be the better option there. But if we just need to ask someone a quick question, Teams may well be the better one. Low formality, we can use abbreviations on that. And also very instant. We can reach a wide audience. They can give sort of a one-word reply. We don't have to have that, dear Fred, blah, 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 kind regards, Richard. And so we just ask the question, and no one's going to be offended by it as well, because there is that expectation of familiarity within it as well. So let's get on to some actual practical tips. How can we actually stay on top of emails? So the first tip I'm going to give you is scheduling your email reviews. I would love to say that I do this every single day, but I do it most days. And I think that the biggest change in my email habit is this. So I now don't keep Outlook open on my desktop. Once I've considered the emails that I need to deal with for the day, I close Outlook and I only go back into it when I want to check emails again. And I do this at scheduled times during the day. Now, some days it goes wrong, but when it does go wrong, it's always because I've started the day in Outlook. And all too often, I can find myself still in Outlook at midday and even sometimes at the end of the day, because as you're responding to emails, other emails are coming in, and you just get locked in this cycle of constantly responding to emails and never actually getting on with the work that you ought to be doing. So if you are needing to draft a report or prepare for a presentation, and you constantly are effectively deferring it, you're procrastinating it by addressing those emails or replying to those emails, a great way of stopping that is to schedule them. So the way I do it, I start the day off. It's not necessarily best practice, but it's my practice. And I think one of the key points I want to make is find your own way of staying on top of emails. Is to look at my emails first thing in the morning. I'm an early riser. I look at the emails. It's a habit born out of dealing with international clients and effectively having to participate in their working day over the other side of the world. So about 5:30, I'll check my emails. And I'll spend usually about 15 minutes or so dealing with anything that's particularly urgent. And then I'll get on with my normal sort of preparations for the day, come to the office, and the thing I don't do is fire up the computer and launch Outlook and check my emails. Because if I've done that, then I haven't done the one thing I ought to be doing. And again, part of my time management structuring is to put the critical task that I need to achieve as my first scheduled item of the day. So I make sure I'm not looking at email, I get my critical task done, and then I'll go back to email, which typically is around 10 o'clock or 10:30 is when I've scheduled my time. I'll spend half an hour just catching up on emails, and then I switch it off again. I'll do the same again around sort of midday, and final one about 3 o'clock, mid-afternoon one about 3 o'clock, and then a final one about 5:30. And at that point, I will then have a greater awareness of what I need to be doing for the next day. Now, some people have sort of pushed back on that and said, but that's going to create a problem. People have an expectation now that you are going to respond immediately to email. And the answer is yes, in the short term. And that's the sort of the trap that we've all fallen into, is we've effectively turned email into instant messaging, or we perceive email in the same way as instant messaging. And if you stop and think about that for a second, that places a lot of stress and strain on us. And really, do we want to be under that pressure of every time an email comes in, we have to be responding to it straight away? And is that the right message we want to be sending to our teams as well? So structure your email reviews, and also educate those that you correspond with as to how you're behaving, so that you've managed their expectations and they know that the reason you haven't responded to them straight away is because you're not necessarily in Outlook at that moment in time. So the next tip is turning off your notifications, and I do this across the board. So on my phone, my home computer, my PC, my laptop, I have no notifications, not just for email, but pretty much any application, because they're all distractors. And if it takes us 64 seconds to refocus on a task once we've been distracted, then why on earth would we want every time an email comes in? And particularly if you're receiving sort of 300-400 emails a day, which I know is on a higher number, but for me, very often that can be the case. Then you don't want a little thing popping up all the time and just sort of sitting there as that temptation saying, look at me, and you sort of effectively drag down to clicking on it. So next tip, using rules to filter emails. Now, I'm a huge advocate of this, and I'm going to give you a practical demo on how I manage this. So the most important rule that I rely on is my marketing email rule. By legislation, all marketing emails have to have an option for you to unsubscribe. And typically, any other emails that you receive directly from correspondence doesn't have an option to unsubscribe. So it's a sort of fairly unique sort of tag on a marketing email. So the way I filter those out is I have a rule that moves all marketing emails into a subfolder of my inbox, and then I have another mechanism within Outlook that manages how long they live in there. So anything with the word unsubscribe is immediately moved to a marketing folder, and I check it once a day. I do it at the end of the day in my sort of 5 o'clock review, 5:30 review. And very occasionally I'll find something in there that perhaps should have gone to the inbox because it's just an inadvertent use of the word unsubscribe, and therefore it's been caught in my marketing filter. And then after 30 days, they go, and I don't worry about them anymore. If I haven't read them, does it really matter? It's a marketing email. But in many cases, I don't necessarily want to not be receiving the marketing emails. I still want to look at them, but on my terms, not on their terms. So effectively, by moving those to a subfolder, you get to control when they come in, or rather when you look at them. So next tip, color coding your emails. So within Outlook, you can apply what's called conditional formatting. And in doing so, you can choose, for instance, your CC. So I have mine in a rather sort of fetching fuchsia pink. And so they are the ones that I know I have to spend less time on, or I don't need to spend as much time on, because they are a CC and not directly to me. I'm not going to go to that length of just deleting them. You can tag VIPs. So if it's your boss, for instance, and you know that if they are sending you emails, they need to stand out, you can give those a different color, and I'll show you how you do those. Batch processing the email, well, that really ties into sorting by sender. Almost these are the same tip. So I keep my email sorted by sender, and very often, whilst I'm not monitoring my email, various other people will be having an email thread, and there may be sort of 10 messages as part of that, perhaps even more. And the top email will give you all of the subsequent or the preceding emails in the chain anyway. So by reading that top email, you can read all the ones underneath it. Having done that, when you've got it sorted by sender, you're then in a position just delete the whole thread in one go, and not have to then worry about finding. If you've got it sorted by date order, as you're working down your list, you then see all of the earlier emails, but because you don't know what they are necessarily, you're then going back in and deleting those out again as well. So the sort by sender enables you just to batch process and delete a whole thread in one go, and it's really satisfying as well. You've got 10 emails that are unread, and you just grab the whole lot, delete, and they're gone. Another way I manage just being focused on the emails I need to see is looking at the unread emails. And when I filter down to unread emails, typically it's sort of 3-4 emails that I then need to look at. And I can then respond just to those without being distracted by all the other emails that potentially are still sitting in my inbox. I'm a great advocate of file and flag. So file and flag allows me to not keep things in my inbox that are for my to-do list. And when I give you the practical demo, by the way, I'll say up front, I've been on leave and I'm still playing a little bit of catch up on my emails. So I'm not quite as good as I've been sort of promoting on this webinar. But again, it highlights where the problem actually lies, that if you aren't on top of it very quickly, it can fall behind. But the file and flag allows me to tag an email for later review. I can then file it, and I do file my emails, and it's the subject of a separate webinar as to how you can effectively retrieve them. But I put all my work emails in a work folder, all my personal emails in a personal folder. I don't subdivide it up. So every work-related email that I want to keep goes into a folder, but I tag it with how long I want to keep it at the same time as well. So I may want to keep it for just 30 days because it is temporary information that is not going to be relevant a year from now. I may keep it for a year because it's something that I want to be able to fall back on, but after a year it's not going to have relevance, or I choose to keep it permanently. And again, I'll show you how you set that up. And my last tip, keeping your inbox clear. So we're going to dive now into a practical demo. So let me just switch over to my screen and I'll show you some of these tips in practice. Right, hopefully you can all see my inbox now. So a few things that I'll point out straight away. The first is my rather fetching fuchsia pink that I talked about before. And so those are the CCs, and I'll show you now how you do that. So on the View menu at the top of Outlook, and apologies, by the way, that if you're not using Outlook, I can't necessarily give you the guidance on where to look in alternative email clients. But if you just take these concepts, you should be able to find equivalent ways of doing it. So you click on the View menu, and then over on the left, we've got View Settings. Down at the bottom, Conditional Formatting, you click on that, and you can see here there are a number of pre-established rules. So Outlook already uses a number of ones. That's how, for instance, your unread messages are shown in bold and your read messages are unbold. Now, you'll see mine at the bottom, CC rule. So by clicking Add, I've created the CC rule. If I click Condition, I can now show you how I've done that. So I've ticked where I am on the CC line with other people. So that's the only condition. If you want to get creative, you can go to Advanced, and you can pretty much go into every single field that Outlook has. So there's a lot of flexibility in the conditions. So you create your condition, and then how are you going to format it? So I've chosen fuchsia, and then you can use different fonts, make it bold, make it italic, lots of different things you can do on that. So that's the conditional formatting. So now my marketing rule. How do I manage that? Oh, sorry, I'll show you notifications first. So if you go to File, and then Options, and then Mail, when you come down here, you've got this message arrival. You see all of mine are unticked. Play a sound, briefly change the mouse pointer, show an envelope icon, and display a desktop alert. So just switch all that off, and you just won't get notified at all when new emails come in. So the marketing emails, where do they go? In my case, they go to this marketing folder. You see I've got 601 emails in there, and they're all potentially of these kind of marketing style. If I right-click on this folder, select Properties, down here, across here on the Policy tab, you'll see I've got a folder policy of 1 month delete. Now, this may not be available to you. It depends whether your organization's email server has set up policies and whether they're available to you to use. If you're in doubt, talk to your IT and they can help get that set up. If you're using Office 365 or an external host, again, that may or may not be set up for you. But if you have got it available, that's where it'll show up, and you'll be able to click on Policy. So how do I actually get them into that folder? So back on my Home tab, you'll see here Rules, Manage Rules and Alerts. I have a lot of different rules, but mine comes into this marketing one. So if I edit the rule now, I'll show you what that looks like. So the first thing is with specific words in the body. So unsubscribe or manage your subscription are the two phrases that I'm looking for, but you can choose other ones along the way. So then click Next. What do I want to do? I want to move it to a specified folder. In my case, marketing, I've chosen that folder. And then any exceptions with specific words in the sender's address. So if you want to make sure that certain people just don't go in that folder, you can add them into that. And give it a name, click Finish. That's it. And that just runs in the background. The emails come in here, and I look at them, as I said, once a day, and don't really worry about it, because there's almost always nothing in here that's of any relevance to me at all. So the tagging now, how do I file and send? So if I look up here, I use these quick steps. So these are ones that I've configured. I've got LTL, Lumina Technologies, mail, 30 days, 1 year, and permanent. So the little drop-down icon on the bottom right allows me to manage them. And if I edit this, I've given it a name, given it an action, move to folder, I mark it as read, and I set my retention policy automatically. So as I'm going through my emails, I'm choosing, do I want to keep this email or not? So for instance, that's a bad example. I've got one from a colleague today. Do you have time for a chat with Sam today? I'm not actually genuinely going to keep it, but I would just click 30 days, that would file it, and away it goes. But instead, delete. Very satisfying. So tagging. Hopefully some of you will already be using flags. I think they're a very powerful feature. So if I want to come back to this one, so for instance, this Sydney workstations, I think I'll find actually a different one. So there's a planned maintenance email here. So I might say, I need to follow up on this week. It's not massively time critical, but I'll file that for 30 days. So I've clicked on the wrong email. I'll go back and find that one in a second. File that. It's gone from my inbox, but if I look at my this week, I've got it there, and it's in my planned maintenance. So effectively, all my flag ones, you can see my backlog here that I need to catch up on, but this is all the stuff I ought to be doing today. I've got tomorrow's stuff, I've got next week, this month, next month, and later. So I'm just dumping them all down. They're all going to this one work folder in my archive, Lumina Technologies, and everything sits in there. I think that was all of the ones on my demo. Let me just go back to my slide deck, and I'll tell you if there's anything else I wanted to cover. Oh yes, the filter to unread. Let me jump back, and the sort by sender. I'll show you those two. Bear with me again. Let me switch back to my screen. All right, so the sort by sender is just covered from up here. It says by from. So date is what most people have it in, but by the from, it allows me to just deal with all of the emails from different people. It really comes into effect most when you then click unread at the same time. So if I look at my unread emails, then I can look at those, and you can see from 156 emails, I've just got 2 emails on there, and I can just process those very quickly. So let me bounce back to the presentation again. Here we are. And back to those tips. So just running through those again. Stay in control of the emails. Don't let them control you. Choose when you want to be looking at your emails, and just shut down Outlook. If you need to keep Outlook open because you're researching previous correspondence, you can easily drop it into offline mode. If you go to the send and receive tab at the top, there's a button there that says work offline. That will stop new emails coming in. If you are integrated with various other Microsoft tools such as Teams, etc., your status will be shown on the email. So for instance, actually, I will bounce back one last time to my screen. So you'll see on my status up here, this is an email to me. I've got this little red block, and if I hover over it, it may or may not show you my status. There we are. So it's saying I'm presenting, which I am, and I'm free at 2:30 because it's integrated to my calendar. It knows what I'm doing. So there's a lot more technology can offer us in terms of understanding how we can communicate through people when they're available to be spoken to, and whether or not they're likely to respond to an email that's being sent. So back to my presentation. Get rid of those notifications. They're just distractors. They serve no benefit at all. And I'm really sort of forceful advocate of having no notifications. I hate it on my phone all the time, like bings going off. I don't have any audible notifications for text messages or for anything else. I know that's perhaps a bit extreme. Other people may not feel comfortable with that, but for me, it's important that I'm actually allowed to focus on my life, and I control when I choose to be interrupted. I use rules extensively. I didn't have time to really show you all of those rules. Color coding again, bring out the most important emails to your attention, so you focus on those first, and then you can go back and through batch processing, sort by sender and filtering to unread, you can understand which ones you need to deal with. So finishing up, I can't remember who this quote came from, and I think it's a great quote, but do we really want to get to our deathbed wishing we'd spent more time on the computer? So that kind of really brings us to the end of this presentation. We're doing another one in October. I don't actually have the details to hand, so if you have a look on our website, on our events page, it'll tell you what we're doing on that one. I hope you found this one useful. If you do have any topics you'd like us to cover and any other sort of ideas that you have, please do let us know either through the chat or survey is going to be going out at the end of this. So please do give us some feedback if you get a chance to do that. It's always appreciated. It helps us kind of tailor the content and make sure that it's relevant for you. And hopefully you will all now master your email, and I look forward to conversations I have with you in the future. If you're one of our clients, or indeed if you'd like to be one of our clients, I'd be more than happy to have that conversation as well. And sort of observing your zero email inboxes. So it just leaves me to wish you a pleasant and productive afternoon, undistracted by email, and please stay tuned and come back for our October webinar. Thank you very much.